Hi, my name is Gjesvold and I'm Manager of Employer Services at Serenity Lane. I'm going to present some information today about the issue of marijuana in the Drug-Free Workplace program. It's kind of a conflict of interest in regards to having marijuana legalized both medically and recreationally in the state of Oregon, and employers having drug-free workplace programs that say you can't do that, even though it's legal. So it's created some confusion and it's created some angst, if you will. Some employers, in fact, that aren't regulated by the federal government have even gone so far as to say we're not going to test for it anymore. So with that in mind, we'll kind of look at some of the things that have created the problem that we have today. If we look at the past, basically the history back in the 1970s, Oregon decriminalized marijuana, making possession of less than an ounce a misdemeanor and a $100 fine. Then in 1998, we became the second state to legalize medical marijuana for qualifying medical conditions. And that has became a very popular program. There's about 80,000, 90,000 cards issued already. In 2010, Oregon becomes the first and only state to change marijuana from a Schedule I to a Schedule II drug. And then in 2014, Measure 91, which made the voters voted in favor of making marijuana legal for recreational use if you're over 21. In October 1st, 2015, medical marijuana dispensaries began selling recreational marijuana, and then in January of 2017, the recreational sales began occurring in recreational dispensaries. And some will say in certain communities you're going to have more dispensaries than you will have coffee shops. It's that popular. There's a huge demand. Prior to 1998, it was a simple solution. Because it was an illegal act, employers merely put into their policies that if you test positive for marijuana, because it's an illegal act, that becomes a disciplinary event. And they would typically put their marijuana positives on a last chance agreement the same way they would of their other drugs. And then the disconnect, of course, is between the federal and state laws. The federal law, it's a Schedule I drug, therefore it's illegal. In the state of Oregon, it's a Schedule II drug. In the Supreme Court about 5 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, they ruled that marijuana does not have any recognized medical use. And then Oregon and other Supreme Courts that have ruled on it have ruled in favor of employers. And in fact, Oregon has gone so far as to rule that employers don't have to accommodate the medical use, even though it is legal. My experience with employers, the card holder would always present the card after they tested positive, and then the employer would call me and want to know what they could do. And my first question to them is, what's in your policy? And in every single case, they did not have any statement in their policy. So it limited what they could do at that point. The good news is the Oregon Supreme Court did rule in April of 2010 that employers do not have to accommodate the medical use of marijuana. The court rulings, again, U.S. Supreme Court ruling, and all the states have ruled. So the present situation is the medical versus recreational use of marijuana. The medical use, you have to have a qualifying medical condition. An application is made to the Department of Health. It's signed by a physician. And then the issue of the card allows you to have a large quantity of marijuana. The recreational use, you have to be at least 21 years of age, just like you do with alcohol. The black market is still there. I was asked again by a number of interviewers whether or not I felt that the black market would go away once marijuana was legalized recreationally and medically, and I said, no, it'll still be there. And what we've found out is 4 years later, it's still there. Problems with marijuana: THC is fat soluble. The brain is the single fattiest tissue in the body. Heavy use can lead to thinking errors and difficulty learning and retaining information. It's not uncommon for people to kind of be forgetful. Changes are a lot more subtle, which in many ways can be more dangerous because the change doesn't happen dramatically and rather quickly like it does with meth or a drug like meth. Reasons to be concerned: the THC levels of marijuana today is very high. Back in the day, the 70s, when I was using, the THC content was probably 2-3%. Today it can be upwards of 10, 15, 20% of just the weed. And then if we're talking about butane honey oil, it can be as high as 90%. So very high concentration. The adverse impact the drug will have on the developing brain of adolescents, if you've got the brain developing until age 25, and subsequently you've got adolescents starting to use the drug at age 15, 16, 17, again, they do vaping, is what they call dabbing or vaping. There's been a high percentage of increase in vaping on the part of adolescents, and I personally feel, it's anecdotal, but I personally feel that a lot of that vaping and dabbing is done because they're using marijuana. And there's going to be some casualties, in my opinion. The problems with edibles are sometimes people will go to social functions and bake something, whether it's a dessert or even a casserole or something with marijuana in it, and not disclose that. If you're in a DOT random pool and you've got a CDL and you happen to eat something, there was a recent block party here in Eugene where somebody baked some into a dessert, didn't tell anybody. 4 people went to the emergency room because they weren't sure what was wrong with them. And he acknowledged or admitted the fact that he had baked something with marijuana in it, but his response was, "What's the big deal? It's legal." So those kinds of things are happening, so you got to be really careful. If somebody with a CDL got tested the following Monday, they'd test positive and they could lose their license. The feds versus the states, it's a revenue issue. It's become such a significant revenue issue that there are a lot of states that are wanting to legalize marijuana now because of the money that they see in that business. Colorado in 2017, sales were $1.5 billion, and the tax revenue was over $500 million. This year in 2019, they're estimating that to go up to over $2 billion, and the tax revenue of $750 million. In Oregon, the recreational use of marijuana the first week was over $11 million, and the tax revenue in the second month was greater than what they anticipated for the entire year. So the best way to put this is the marijuana and the taxation of marijuana has become a cash cow. And much like the video poker of years ago, if the states can see this as being a source of revenue, they're going to pursue it. The state of Vermont, in fact, basically didn't even go to the voters. They just legislatively legalized it for that purpose. In the past 6 years, the medical use of marijuana is legal in 33 states. The recreational use of marijuana is legal in 10 states in the District of Columbia. Again, Vermont was the first state to legislate it. Law enforcement is now starting to use saliva testing in addition to urine testing. It's what I'm suggesting employers do as well, because any collection agency can also take saliva if they're taking urine. And the issue around saliva, if that's positive for THC, is that that's an indication that the person has used the drug recently, whereas in urine it could be 10, 12 days since they used it. So with documentation of impaired performance, with a positive saliva test and a positive urine test, you're going to have a stronger argument for that person being currently impaired, which is the issue that comes up legally. Federally regulated employees is zero tolerance. There's no policy regarding duty. DOT, hospitals, other public agencies. Non-federally regulated employees and licensing boards may want to take a more cautionary approach until things could be sorted out legally. We're still in the midst of determining what's going to happen. CBDs, hemp, and THC. One of the issues creating the confusion is that the science is finding that marijuana does have some significance in a positive way and therapeutic way and medical benefits. One of the examples is the cannabidiols or the CBDs in treating seizure disorders and pain. There are 483 active chemicals in marijuana. Legalization of hemp in all but 2 states, Oklahoma and Idaho. We just had a trucker that was hauling a load of hemp to Colorado and got stopped in Idaho and subsequently was arrested and charged with a felony. He had about 2,800 pounds. And the issue of hemp versus marijuana is there's no distinguishable difference in terms of how it looks. So you would assume that it might be marijuana, not knowing. There's no way of testing it at this point to determine the difference. It's created a heavy and heated debate in Washington, D.C. as to possibly legalizing marijuana. The recent FDA announcement was mentioned is that they're not going to change the status of marijuana from a Schedule I to a Schedule II drug, but they are going to lift the restrictions for federal studying and research. And there will be a lot. There's a lot of money to be made in the research to find out some of the things that we need to know about this drug, both the benefits and the problems. At the same time, they announced that they would lift the restrictions. Public sentiment regarding marijuana 5 years ago, we were basically looking at 40% approval. Now it's for recreational 64% approval and over 90% approval for medical marijuana being legalized. So the social acceptance of this drug is a lot more serious. What's the future workforce going to look like? It's a big question mark. I just got my consumer report, which is a pretty conservative magazine, and there was a 7-page article in there on CBDs and marijuana, which you wouldn't expect, but it's becoming that widely accepted. Supervisor's responsibility, under federal and state laws, employers are obligated to maintain a safe work environment for all employees, including those that might be using marijuana. There is a prolonged effect that can occur with marijuana, which doesn't occur with, say, a water-soluble drug. And so anyone acting as an agent for the employer must address employees that become present or are present in the workplace that are questionably fit for duty. And then we need to sort things out and determine what might be going on with them, whether it's a medical issue or whether it's a drug use issue that could be contributing to that. Symptoms of possible marijuana use: difficulty staying focused on task, minimizing complacency, distortion of time and space, isolating, they're confused. We've had situations where people have difficulty doing a task that they've done for years because of the drug marijuana. Short and long-term memory problems, disheveled appearance. They might be neat and tidy most of the time, but all of a sudden you're noticing that they're kind of messy and sloppy. And then inappropriate laughter. Those are some of the symptoms that could be contributed to or caused by current marijuana use. The future, what should employers do? Well, the challenge is, unlike alcohol, there is no testing for current impairment. So we can determine that there's THC in the body, but we can't prove that the person is impaired due to that. Until science catches up, I think measuring current impairment in the workplace while driving will be difficult to establish. And that's why I'm recommending that the employers do both saliva testing and urine testing. The not so good news is, again, the AFSCME versus Lane County. There was a terminated employee that had a medical marijuana card. The AFSCME union represented him and filed a grievance, binding arbitration. The decision was made by the arbitrator that he wasn't impaired at work. There's no evidence he used at work, and the punishment was too severe for the offense. So he gave him his job back. He gave him $23,000 in back pay and $8,000 in attorney's fees. So that's one case that the employee won. And they had the following benefits. The employee was terminated because he had a medical marijuana card, and the Oregon Supreme Court said employers don't have to accommodate the medical use of marijuana. Secondly, they received federal funds, which they don't want to lose those. And thirdly, they had a policy that was stating zero tolerance. So again, a lot of the employers that called me before Measure 91 passed, or even the medical marijuana law was in effect, they were saying that they were going to use the same kind of a procedure that they do with alcohol. And my comment was, you really can't do that because there's no way of measuring current impairment. And we now have case law that would indicate that that's the case. More not so good news, the Johns Hopkins University Medical School study regarding passive inhalation can attain a mild contact high because of the intensity of the marijuana. Number two, several individuals tested positive above the 50 nanogram threshold. So that's not the case anymore. Employers and law enforcement are prevailing in challenges that shows documented evidence of symptoms of impairment, a positive urine test, and a positive saliva test to be consistent with the current intoxication. So that is one way of helping get past that, or have a more defendable position on any kind of discipline. And the suggestion is employers that they have a plan in place before it comes up, because once the emotional turmoil starts, it becomes an issue that you're making decisions without thinking through it. If you've got a plan in place before that, then you have a higher probability of having a sensible outcome. And then once we move forward, there will be more research and there will be more science found out about this drug, and that will be very beneficial in learning more about it. Options to consider: maintain a zero tolerance. It would be advisable to make a statement in your policy to indicate how you will handle a positive urine screen for THC. So again, have it in your policy. If you're going to have a zero tolerance, have a statement indicating that. Notify the employees that you're only concerned about them being fit for duty, so that you're only going to test them when they appear to be impaired. And in the event that they do appear to be impaired and they test positive, then you're going to treat it as a disciplinary event. And then the third option is to do nothing, and that's not advisable. I'm finding that today, because of the challenge with being able to prove current impairment, that a lot of employers are throwing their hands up. The other issue that's happening is that employers will want to hire somebody, they take the pre-employment drug test and fail the test due to marijuana. So they've got some employers that are saying, you know what, I don't want to know, so they don't ask. Thank you.